Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Brendan Hauser with EVOQ Bike, a little bit sunburned down here in forever summer. Want to talk about progressive overload, which we know is important in order to get faster. But this athlete had a question, and I had a video on progressing through intervals last year. His was actually on endurance. He had a concern saying, if I only have enough motivation right now to do moderate volume, how much will that benefit me when it lacks progressive overload compared to the amount of weekly zone 2 I was doing earlier in the season? So said differently, he's going to do less endurance. Is that going to do anything for him? Yes, definitely. Does the progressive overload come from that I'd probably be doing that lower volume at a higher absolute power, but similar relative intensity from being more fit or something like that, question mark. So there's no need for progressive overload for endurance riding. Yes, I have a video, more volume is better in my opinion. And the more volume you do, actually the easier you'll ride in the endurance zone. That's why it is a zone. If there was a need for progressive overload for endurance riding, we'd all need to ride 1,000,000 hours for it to count for anything. So watch the Why Ride Endurance video about all the physiological changes that are happening. That's even happening when you're doing 90 minutes of endurance, 60 minutes of endurance. Do 60 minutes of endurance a bunch of times, you will get faster from that. So the progressive overload is helpful when we look at, say, the duration of a tempo ride. Maybe you started with 25 minutes and now you can do 35 minutes of the same RPE, or you'd look for the RPE to come down on the same duration. It's not always more though. And I came up training thinking it's always got to be more watts. It's always got to be more time. Sometimes it's less RPE. Sometimes it's lower heart rate. It's easy for us to all get caught up in this more. And that is just not endurance training. So to that point, if it was always more absolute watts, we would have 800 watt FTPs, 1600 watt, like it would just keep growing. So again, don't just listen to me. Watch Inigo San Milan talk about this. Watch Tom Bell talk about this. There's a ton of coaches talking about why riding endurance is so good no matter when you're doing it. And just don't get sucked into less time, ride harder. Because it's funny, a lot of people are putting out free content to tell you to ride more endurance. And then there's a lot of other people selling you sweet spot plans for $49. It's very interesting. Sweet spot is not the answer. Just because you have to ride less does not mean you need to ride a little bit more. And we can review why that's not a good strategy if you have questions on that. I also think that we are hyper-focused on block training. And I have come up in this training regime, or however we want to call it, like I would say, and I'm sure I have blogs talking about a threshold block, a VO2Max block. And I started to really look more in the micro of my own training, of how I coach athletes. And an athlete said to me, well, when are we going to do a VO2 max block? And we had done some lactate clearance work. We'd done some VO2 max training. And in my head, I'm thinking of training him as a full athlete. So those are two areas that he definitely needs to improve on. So those are ongoing training. We've been sort of taught that you need to block this training out. And there's podcasts where people talk about you get the most benefit from the first 5 to 6 workouts. You need to make sure you crush those. Well, if you're doing 5 VO2 max workouts and this is a block of training, then you're neglecting everything else and you're getting pretty tired. This, I do believe, though, is where our idea of progressive overload came from. My first issue that I have with this is that the numbers that we normally pick or the durations are relatively arbitrary, right? You might say we're talking about FTP type intervals, whether it be over-unders, steady state, start at 4x10, go to 3x15, go to 3x20, or maybe 2x20. The starting point, we don't know. That could be too easy for you. So you could go through the first 2 workouts and you're definitely not squeezing the most juice from them. And then you get to the actual work and you've already wasted a week of training. Not wasted, but it's not as optimal as it could be. Or even worse, it's too hard to start. You start a block of training, you're thinking you're fresh, you go and you get your face kicked in and you're thinking, what the hell just happened? Nothing bad, You're just not ready for it yet. I'm not ready for it. Like it has happened before, right? And so this is where we find our weaknesses. Instead of doing that, I think we really need to hone in on this idea of training the full athlete. What do they need? And then moving forward with that, not just a block formation where we're only looking to progress by duration and watts, but what is actually physiologically happening to this athlete? If you go out and you do some over-unders and they're feeling too easy, then go a little bit harder on the over. Make the under a little bit shorter. Make the over a little bit longer. I said do 6 reps, do 8 reps. Reduce the rest in between them. Like, there needs to be some ownership in our training because our coaches can't make everything exactly perfect. And when I go out to train, if my coach puts go do X, Y, and Z, and I didn't sleep well, I didn't eat well, something's off that day, then that's just going to be a bad session. Doesn't mean that I'm not progressing, right? But if we're so overly focused on this overload principle, which is the point of training in general is overload. That's what 3 weeks on, 1 week off means. Train, recover. Overload the system, recover, come back and do it again. But to that same point as before, it's not always going all the way up, or we'd have 1,000 watt FTPs. We'd be, doing over-unders at the overs at 700 watts and the unders at 550. So we need to make sure that this overload principle does not drive every aspect of success and failure in our training, because that's just not true. To make this easier to digest and to go along with the idea, I do believe in progression in training, threshold intervals. Let's say you're doing steady state. Maybe you do them around 100% the first day. Maybe the next day you're doing them, the next session you're doing them at 102%, or the RPE came down a little bit. Or maybe you do it a little bit longer. You need to be able to fiddle with this a little bit and see, hey, do I feel like I'm getting stronger week over week? Look at the trends, because also these changes you don't go do Tuesday's workout and come back Thursday well, I'm a new man. I'm ready to go crush. I crushed Tuesday, so I'm definitely going to crush today. Maybe not. If you don't crush Thursday's workout, that doesn't mean that Tuesday was a waste. And then, we've already talked about how to progress through VO2Max intervals in different videos, so I won't belabor that point. But don't over focus, and I tell myself this, on just, I gotta do more, I gotta progress. If you're training your VO2Max, you know why you're doing that training, you're getting faster. If you're doing over-unders, you know why you're working the lactate clearance side of things, you're getting faster. If you're doing steady state threshold, and maybe you're working on lactate tolerance, or you're trying to increase the capillarization and the mitochondrial density, all those things that we can't see or feel, but we know are happening on a cellular level, I personally don't prescribe those because you can achieve those through endurance riding and other aspects of training. But if that's what you're going after in a threshold session and you do 4x10 and then you fail 3x15 and you only do 2x15, it doesn't mean you totally sucked. You got 30 minutes of good training in, maybe you're a little tired. Maybe it was just a little bit too much. Maybe the 4x10 was a little bit too far down the road. Maybe you should have started at 4x8 and that would have been enough. And then 4x10 would have been, do you see what I'm saying? So it's a really good question. Hopefully this video helps you just stay sane during the training. We're getting towards race season. Some people are already in race season. I'm in forever Florida, or forever summer, where I forget that winter is happening. And I feel like I'm missing out on racing already. I'm getting super antsy. But as training picks up and the events start happening more frequently, athletes freak out. They freak out about, did I do enough? Did I not do enough? Am I doing enough? Should I do this more? And then it becomes this more. And then they're burnt by the middle of June. Take a deep breath, move forward. And my last comment, don't overly focus on one day's workout. You're going to fail at some point if you're training hard enough, and you're training, even if you're training the right things at the right times, there's going to be days. Look at the trends. Look at what you did in the past few weeks. Look at when you just felt like you were absolutely flying. At some point, you're still going to hit PRs for a really long time. At some point, they come less and less. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to tell. If you're that far along in your training, you should still be able to tell, am I getting faster? Am I getting ready to go? This Cove ride this past Saturday felt way better than a Cove 3 weeks ago. I'm ramping up. I'm doing my base. But as I'm doing base, my fitness is increasing. So that's the name of the game. Follow the trends. And thank you guys. We are at 4,000 subs and we crossed 750,000 views. You guys are incredible. I'm glad this channel is hopefully helping you get faster. The bonus tip is when you're doing VO2Max intervals, say the first 3 go good, they're cranked along and you start to fail a little bit on the power on the 3rd one, don't quit. Put yourself through at least the 4th one. And if you're totally dead, then don't worry about the 5th. Let's say you're doing 5. But there's a good chance that when you're still going really hard, even if your watts suck, your heart rate is up and elevated and you're getting work on your stroke volume completed. And at the same time, if you quit after 3, I promise you, when you go back, you're already going to be dreading that 4th one. Whereas if you do 3 and you kind of start to falter on the 3rd one and you try the 4th one, you know what that feels like. You're going to go back and say, like, all right, I'm getting through 4 of these. I might not even get to number 5, but I'm going to get through 4. This thing controls so much of training. I cannot pass that along. That's a bonus tip. The brain, you got to go through some hard stuff and then you will find belief in yourself. And when you believe, you will achieve more than you ever think is possible. I promise you that. Good luck with your training. Please share the video with a friend that could use some help, some motivation, some inspiration. Let's get it. Hopefully see a bunch of you at the races this year. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.